Year it's been for the mutual fund industry. In fact, let's start with a conversation about that. The mutual fund industry, I think this year you can say for sure has been the year of the SIP, because you've had very consistent flows into mutual funds through this route. Every year since July of last year, you've seen a record apart from this one figure where you saw a bit of a drop off and just by a couple of crore rupees. But an interesting talking point has emerged in the recent past. The fact that this is gross inflows, the net inflows, which also account for cancellation of SIPs, is much lower. In fact, in the recent times, it's been around 40%, in certain cases even less than 40% of the gross. We'll speak about that in some time. But let's talk about the overall flows into mutual funds, and I'm talking about a few categories here. You have active equity, which has stood out as the preferred vehicle for investors in 2024, and that continues to be the case. 3.5 lakh crore rupees being invested mostly by investors in the retail category into actively managed equity mutual funds. You also had hybrid mutual funds at quite a bit of inflows, and particularly in the multi-asset category because of the better taxation that is available now in that particular scheme. Debt mutual funds saw inflows largely from institutions, not too much from the retail side, and that is evident in the fact that as a percentage of overall assets under management, debt mutual funds have actually declined while the other two categories have inched up just a bit. Let's also drive home the point on inflows into equity category. Let's pull up the slide, and we're talking about a consistent investment across the board. Of course, a large part of this coming through in the form of investments into sectoral and thematic, especially in the actively managed equity category. Close to 40% of inflows into that category. Even the hybrid, what I was talking about earlier, you've had more or less consistent inflows apart from a couple of blips here and there. But as I said, the multi-asset category has stood out in terms of investor preference. Let's also talk about one major factor that has played out in the actively managed space, and let's talk about sectoral and thematic and the fact that it is now the largest category in the actively managed equity space. You know about this. It is in fact something that has gone past the Flexi cap category. What you see on the screen, of course, is the total assets under management, but also take a look at it in terms of the percentage of AUM, which you will see has inched up to 15.2% for sectoral and thematic compared with 14.3% for Flexi cap as things stand right now. New fund offers, there were quite a few that came through in 2024 and a large number of them in the passive category. So you have nearly 97 at last count in the passive category, and they've managed to garner about 22% of the flows into equity passive I'm talking about. But the other big category where you saw a lot of offerings were the sectoral and thematic categories, where a lot of mutual funds decided to launch themes that you probably haven't heard of before, and which saw a lot of takers. Let's talk about which mutual fund houses stood out in terms of most offerings, and Tata and Mirae Asset have stood out with 19 each. You also had Kotak and Motilal Oswal that each offered about 18 or so. Let's talk about the top performers in a few key categories, and in the large cap space, you had White Oak Capital, Invesco India and DSP that stood out with considerable beat compared with the benchmark, which by the way is a BSE 100. The category average stood at 15%, and that itself is a beat compared with the benchmark, not something that you hear about every year because the large cap category is particularly difficult for the fund manager to beat the benchmark. In the mid cap category, you also saw quite a few beats, and it's a 28.6% category average. So chances are that if you invested in mid caps or mid cap mutual funds, you went home with quite a bit of return in 2024. The top, of course, is Motilal Oswal. A lot of inflows into this particular scheme, and the scheme has done incredibly well, an outperformance of over 30%. Not every year that you see something like that happening. Even in the small cap category, you see a couple of schemes that have outperformed in a big way, 19.2%. But the category average, interestingly, is less than the mid cap category. Even though it's said that the potential for return in the small cap category is considerably higher. Bandhan, Invesco also standing along with Motilal Oswal in this category. Even in the Flexi Cap category, you see quite a lot of the same names. Motilal Oswal standing out again. It was an underperformer in 2023, but it's ranked at the top in this year, and it has an outperformance of close to 30%. You also have JM Financial, which has stood out. A couple of names that you've probably been used to seeing, Parag Parikh, for example, in this particular category, which has once again garnered the most inflows in this particular category, has not ranked in the top because of its strategy of keeping more cash. It has continued to do that even towards the end of this year. The last category we're talking about, of course, is the sectoral and thematic category. Interestingly, 60% or thereabouts of funds in this category have beaten their benchmark, 40% have not, which is quite telling in my opinion, because you have about 190 schemes in this category, so quite a large number of them have actually failed to beat the benchmark. The top, of course, have managed to beat the benchmark by quite a big margin.